Some people destroy their own lives without ever fully understanding how or why it happened. My wife, Lauren, is one of those people. My name is Jason, and if you've ever been blindsided by someone you trusted completely, then this story might strike a chord with you. For the longest time, I believed Lauren was my biggest supporter. Couldn't have been more wrong. This is the story of how I found out my wife was cheating on me with my boss. And the moment I saw it with my own eyes, I knew everything had changed forever. I've always been the kind of person who believes that hard work eventually pays off. That if you stay dedicated, put in the effort, and make sacrifices, sooner or later you'll see the rewards. I worked at Sterling Enterprises, a company known for being one of the best in the industry. While many of my coworkers rushed out the door at exactly 5 p.m., I stayed behind, double-checking reports, fine-tuning strategies, and making sure my work was impeccable. I wasn't just coasting by, I was investing in my future. And now it was all about to pay off. The company was hosting its prestigious annual Sterling Enterprises dinner. It was formal, exclusive, and high stakes. Promotions weren't just sent out via email. They were announced publicly, in front of an audience filled with executives, employees, and important clients. If your name was called that night, it meant your hard work had been recognized. It meant you were moving up. I was one of the top candidates. I knew I was being considered for a major promotion, and this wasn't just about a fancier job title. It meant a bigger paycheck, greater opportunities, and real influence within the company. That night was supposed to be a celebration, not just for me, but for us. The one thing I had no doubt about was Lauren. My wife, my rock, my biggest supporter. We had been together for years, through everything. She wasn't just my spouse. She was the person who pushed me forward even when I second-guessed myself. Not once did I ever question her loyalty. I had no reason to, or at least that's what I thought. The night of the annual company dinner finally arrived, and the venue was just as extravagant as you'd expect from a firm like Sterling Enterprises. I wasn't just proud of my career that night. I was proud of the woman standing beside me. Lauren looked stunning. She had always been effortlessly beautiful, but that evening, there was something about the way she carried herself. Graceful, confident, effortlessly drawing attention. Heads turned as we walked in together. I introduced her to my colleagues, and like always, she knew exactly how to engage people. She had a way of holding a conversation that made her instantly likable, and it didn't take long before everyone in the room was drawn to her. Even some of the senior partners, the ones who barely acknowledged most employees, seemed to be captivated by her presence. As I stood beside her, watching the admiration she received, I felt nothing but pride. This was my wife, my partner, the woman I had built a life with, and in that moment, I felt lucky to have her by my side. But as the evening continued, I started noticing things. Small things at first. Lauren seemed to gravitate toward Richard, my boss. A man with power, influence, and the ability to shape careers. He wasn't just respected in the company. He was the one who controlled opportunities, deciding who climbed the corporate ladder and who stayed in place. First, I brushed it off. She was just being friendly, right? That's what I told myself. She was making conversation, being polite. But something about it didn't sit right with me. Then, at one point, Richard leaned in, saying something in a low voice, and Lauren responded with a smile. I couldn't hear what was said, but for the first time that night, I felt like an outsider. Like I was watching something unfold that I wasn't meant to understand. And just like that, an uneasy feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. A few hours later, Lauren leaned in close, resting her hand lightly on my arm. I need to take this, she murmured, lifting her phone slightly. I glanced at the screen. No name, just a number. I nodded. Yeah, sure. I'll be here. She smiled, gave my arm a gentle squeeze, and then disappeared into the crowd of executives and waitstaff carrying trays of champagne. At first, I didn't think much of it. I kept my focus on the conversation happening around me, nodding along as my colleagues discussed market trends and upcoming projects. But then 20 minutes passed. Lauren was still gone. I casually glanced around, expecting to spot her near the bar or chatting with another guest. Nothing. Another 5 minutes. I checked my phone. No messages from her. Maybe she had stepped outside for some fresh air where it was quieter. Maybe the call was just taking longer than she expected. I turned my attention back to the discussion, trying to ignore the small but growing knot of unease in my chest. Another 5 minutes. Now it had been half an hour since she left, and suddenly, I wasn't feeling so sure anymore. A slight nudge on my arm snapped me out of my thoughts. I turned to see Tyler, a colleague of mine. We weren't particularly close, but we had worked together enough times to be on friendly terms. He leaned in slightly, swirling the whiskey in his glass, and muttered under his breath, "You've got a lot of patience, man. If my wife was that cozy with my boss, I'd be asking some questions." I let out a short laugh. "What are you talking about?" I asked, keeping my tone light. Tyler took a slow sip of his drink and shrugged. "Come on, man. We all see it. She's been glued to Richard all night." Laughing, touching his arm, giving him those looks. I didn't say anything. Couldn't. I forced a smile and told him Lauren was just being friendly. But by then, that gnawing unease in my stomach had turned into full-blown suspicion. I checked my watch again. 35 minutes had passed since she had excused herself to take that call. I started scanning the room, my eyes moving from one group of executives to another, searching for her familiar figure. But no matter where I looked, she was nowhere to be seen. I checked near the bar, thinking maybe she had run into someone she knew. Nothing. I glanced toward the balcony, a spot where guests often went to get some air. Empty. And that's when it hit me. I hadn't seen Richard in a while either. A cold realization crept over me as the pieces started falling into place. My pulse quickened, and my body tensed as I moved through the venue, my steps growing faster with each second. The hum of conversations faded into the background. I wasn't even sure where I was headed. My feet were just moving, driven by an instinct I was desperately hoping was wrong. As I made my way down one of the quieter hallways, I passed by the restrooms. That's when I caught the sound of hushed voices, barely audible through the thick doors. I slowed down, listening carefully, my mind already racing. Then I heard something else, a muffled moan. I took a step forward, then another. I stopped just inches away from the door, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Forcing myself to speak, I called out, "Lauren!" Silence. I swallowed hard and tried again, my voice steadier this time. "Lauren, are you in there?" Still nothing. Then came a rustling sound, the kind of noise people make when they've just been caught doing something they shouldn't be doing. That pause, that hesitation, it told me everything I needed to know. My patience snapped. Reaching into my pocket, I pulled out my phone, ready to call security if necessary. But before I could press the button, the door creaked open. Lauren stepped out first. Strands of her hair had come loose, framing her flushed face. The elegant dress she had worn so flawlessly earlier was now wrinkled, slightly disheveled, like someone had been tugging at it. Then, right behind her, Richard emerged. His tie was loose, the top button of his shirt undone. His expression wasn't panicked like Lauren's. It was controlled, calculating, like he was already assessing how bad the situation really was. For a long moment, none of us spoke. We didn't have to. The truth was standing right there in front of me, impossible to ignore. Oddly enough, I felt nothing. No rage, no urge to yell. Without saying a word, I unlocked my phone and hit record. "Tonight is the annual Sterling Enterprises dinner," I said, my voice calm and steady. "This is my wife, Lauren, and this is my boss, Richard. I just caught them making out in a restroom together." Richard tensed. Lauren let out a sharp gasp, stepping toward me. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Jason, please." I raised a hand, cutting her off. I wasn't interested in excuses. I wasn't looking for explanations. I held the camera on them for a few seconds longer, watching as their perfect little charade collapsed beneath the weight of the truth. Then, without another word, I stopped the recording and turned away. I didn't say a single thing to either of them. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to fix. I didn't need an apology from Richard. I didn't need to hear Lauren beg for forgiveness. I simply walked out, left her behind, and drove home alone. I no longer cared about the promotion. As I drove, my phone buzzed in the passenger seat. A text, then a missed call, then another. I didn't check. I didn't care. The last thing I wanted was to hear her voice. An hour later, I heard the front door creak open. Lauren stepped inside. Her face was streaked with tears, her makeup smudged. It looked like she'd been crying the entire drive home. But honestly, I felt nothing. She didn't speak right away. She just stood there, searching my face, desperate for a sign that this could still be salvaged. Jason, I lifted my hand. Don't. That was all I said. I didn't want to hear whatever excuse she had prepared. I wasn't interested in how sorry she was. The moment I saw them together, everything changed. The rest of the night passed in silence. No arguments. No shouting. She lingered near the door for a while, silently pleading for me to say something. But I couldn't, and I wouldn't. I sat on the couch, staring blankly at the TV, not even registering what was playing. She stood there, waiting. Eventually, she gave up. By the time I went to bed, my phone was overflowing with messages. Word had already spread. Colleagues had heard what happened. People wanted details, why I left early, what went down. I ignored them all. I had no interest in entertaining gossip. By the time I woke up, I knew I was done. Lauren was still in the house somewhere, likely sitting in silence, waiting for me to say something. Anything that might suggest there was a way forward. But there wasn't. I got out of bed and made my way to the kitchen. She was there, seated at the table, gripping a coffee mug that had long since gone cold. The moment I walked in, she looked up, her bloodshot eyes pleading. Jason, please. Her voice was weak, barely above a whisper. I pulled out a chair and sat across from her, my face unreadable. I let the silence stretch before I finally spoke. This marriage is over. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. My tone was steady, absolute. Lauren flinched, as if the words physically struck her. No, Jason, please, she begged. It was a mistake. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. I love you. I let out a short, humorless laugh. You love me, I repeated. Then, after a pause, I asked, was it just Richard? Or are there others? She didn't answer. She didn't even try. And that silence? That was all the answer I needed. Exhaling, I pushed back my chair and stood up. Your time in this house is up when the divorce is finalized. My voice didn't waver. After that, we're done. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she broke into quiet, shuddering sobs. Her entire body trembled under the weight of what she had done. I turned away and walked out, leaving her with the only thing she had left, the consequences of her betrayal. Word travels fast in the corporate world, but a scandal like this? It spreads even faster. At first, I ignored the whispers. I had no interest in being part of the office gossip. But by Monday morning, the higher-ups had caught wind of what had happened at the company dinner. Richard getting caught with an employee's wife wasn't just a personal disaster. It was a professional catastrophe. Sterling Enterprises built its reputation on integrity and leadership. Richard didn't just cross the line, he obliterated it. An internal investigation was launched. And as they dug deeper, they found something that didn't surprise me in the slightest. Richard had a pattern. Lauren wasn't his first affair within the company. Turns out, he had been using his position to pursue multiple women at work. Some of the relationships had been consensual. Others blurred the line between coercion and manipulation, hidden under the guise of mentorship. And just like that, his downfall was set in motion. HR had turned a blind eye before, but this time they couldn't. With witnesses, undeniable evidence, and a scandal too big to sweep under the rug, they had no choice but to act. By the end of the week, Richard was placed on leave. A week later, he was fired. Just like that, everything he had built, his career, his reputation, his influence was gone. The same man who once held the power to shape other people's futures had just had his own ripped away. And me? I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel anything at all. By the time Richard's downfall was complete, I had already moved on. Lauren, on the other hand, still didn't seem to get it. Even after everything crumbled, after every consequence landed squarely on her shoulders, she still looked at me with those same desperate, confused eyes, like she genuinely couldn't understand why it had all fallen apart. Some people destroy their own lives without ever fully realizing how or why it happened. She was one of them, and honestly, that was no longer my problem. Weeks passed after our separation, and life started feeling normal again. Work was steady. My routine was back. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like myself again. Then, one night, my phone buzzed. A single message. "I miss you. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen, reading the words once, then again. I let them sink in. Then, without hesitation, I deleted the message. No response. No long-winded conversation for closure. She made her choices, and I made mine. So, let me ask you, what would you have done? Would you have given her another chance? Would you have stayed and tried to work things out? Or would you have done exactly what I did? Walked away? No second chances. No justifications. Here's the truth. Some betrayals can't be undone. Some people don't realize what they've lost until it's too late. And when that moment comes, you won't even care anymore. Thanks for watching. And if you've ever been through something like this, drop a comment below. What would you have done? Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like.